Good day, everyone. Richard Cowperthwait for Northwest Access TV. Thanks for joining us for the first of several shows involving our legislative candidates as we get ever closer within a month to the November 3rd election. I realize some people have already voted, but I assume a lot of people out there have not voted, so hopefully we'll be throwing out some useful information for you. Our first show will be involving the candidates from the Franklin 3-1 Vermont House District. That's all of St. Albans City, part of St. Albans Town. And I should note, got a doubleheader today at 2:30, from 2:30 to perhaps 3:30 or a little before that. I'll be interviewing the candidates from the Franklin 5 district. That's another two-member district that covers Highgate, Franklin, Berkshire, and Richford. And I might as well finish out the roster here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I think all these shows are going to be live here on Channel 1089, your public access TV station. Carolyn Brannigan, the Georgia Republican candidate for state treasurer, will be joining me tomorrow morning. And also this week, Wednesday, from 5 to 6 p.m., the House candidates from the Swanton-Sheldon district. And finally, next Monday, a week from today, the state Senate candidates, or at least some of them. And that show will be from 6 to 7 a week from today. But we're talking Franklin 3-1 right now, and happy to have, I should say, 4 of the 5 candidates. Representative Casey Toof, St. Albans Town Republican. Casey Bruce Cheeseman, the second Republican on the ballot from St. Albans Town. Representative Mike McCarthy, a St. Albans City Democrat, and David Glidden, a St. Albans City Democrat. I should note, if you've looked at a ballot, there's one more candidate running, Wayne Bilodeau III, a St. Albans City resident running as an independent. He received an invite to join us, but declined to do so. Anyway, so thanks folks for the time. A strange election year. David, let's start with yourself. Is this your first bid for political office, or am I mistaken?
This is my first bid as a candidate. It's not popular to say you've been in politics your whole life, but one of my first memories was the summer before second grade. My dad was living in Burlington, Vermont, and I kept falling down and skinning my knees on the sidewalks. And he finally said, let's do something about it. And we went around and we photographed the sidewalks and put together a little scrapbook of where I thought the sidewalks, as a 6-year-old, should be repaired. And I went to city council and I presented. And ever since then, I've been really interested in making government work for me and work for my community and seeing what I can do to make the world a better place.
Give us a little background on yourself and why you decided to jump into this race.
Oh, that's a great question. My family's originally from Cornwall, grew up in Underhill, Vermont, and have been living and working in St. Albans basically since 2016. I serve on the downtown board currently. Have been involved in politics in a couple different roles here in Vermont, and then currently work at Outright Vermont serving LGBTQ youth throughout the state. I decided to get into this race when talking to so many wonderful people about why they should get involved this year and consider running. And I looked at what was happening in Montpelier, and I thought from minimum wage to paid family leave to fair and impartial policing, that I could be an important advocate for our community.
Very good. Let's go to the other non-incumbent, Bruce Cheeseman, former St. Albans Town Selectman. Bruce, no stranger to running for public office.
No, but I got to admit, this one's different than running for selectman. I'll tell you that.
Little different ball game, huh?
Yeah. Well,
So
to begin with, this year, at this time of the year, it's easier to put your signs in the ground than in March.
So why'd you decide, again, you're veteran, former selectman, why'd you decide to take a shot at the House?
Well, I guess, for the same reasons that Mr. Glidden has decided, I've taken a look at what's going on in Montpelier, and I've often wondered, why does it take, or what does it take to get something done, to get a bill passed? And what's the process? I know both Casey and Mr. McCarthy have been working on some projects and come up with stuff. I just would like to understand the process, because there's a lot of good issues that have come up that would have been very beneficial to the state of Vermont, and Franklin County, that just seems to go nowheres.
And we'll get into
and
as you know,
I am a conservative, and I just I'm always up for a good fight, good battle, but there's got to be a reason for it, and the outcome has to be beneficial to the people of this town and city.
Very good. Representative Casey Toof running for a second term. Casey, what a strange election year. Hopefully you folks will never see anything quite like this again. Easy decision to try for a second term?
Yeah, and first of all, thank you for having us again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on.
But yeah, it was a pretty easy decision. I mean, you bring up the crazy times that we're in. When I first ran I ran in 2012, but I also ran in 2018. You're kind of the way you run kind of changes, or what your job is as a state representative. Mine changed March 13th when we went on break and had to start remote meeting. Before, in 2019, in the beginning of the 2020 session, we were fighting for more affordable Vermont, and our same talking points that we've been working with the governor with for years. But once COVID hit, it became, what can I do for my constituents, and what can I do to inform them? And so I became, particularly with my legislative minutes, I've been updating people weekly on what's going on in the legislature, what are some programs we're working on to get out to help you. And it went from a Republican-Democrat fight to just a joint effort between House, Senate, and the governor on how can we help people across the state, and it was really refreshing. And so that's the kind of state I want to be a part of, and that's why it helped me decide to run again, because it's, what are we going to do? Why are we in this position? It's to help the people and represent the people of our community, and that is it was really refreshing to see us all work together. I think only 5 people voted against the budget this year. It was usually that's when we get everyone on the same
Anybody
page.
from Franklin County? Was Franklin County delegation unanimous on
I think
the
we're all
budget?
unanimous on that.
Yeah,
I think so.
There were a few just south of us, Chittenden County, voted no on them. But yeah.
So almost unanimous.
Yeah, about as good as it
Close
gets.
as you're going to get.
Yeah.
Interesting. Democratic Rep. Mike McCarthy, also a St. Albans City Councilor. Mike also running for re-election, and you logged some earlier time in Montpelier as well, so you'd like another couple of years at least.
Yeah, so this is my second term that we've just wrapped up, and I'd be really honored to serve the community again for a third term. I've served both of my terms on the House Transportation Committee, and so from a policy perspective, I've got an opportunity now with some seniority on that committee to be able to shape the agenda and also make sure that we're moving our transportation infrastructure investments toward more efficiency. That's been a long process of getting more out of the dollars that we spend on the House Transportation Committee over a decade, but also preparing for a future that's going to have far more efficient vehicles that are going to be electric. We're going to need to change the way that we fund the infrastructure that we have.
Gas tax revenues obviously will be keep going down, presumably.
Yeah, and what we're seeing, we're very dependent in Vermont on federal dollars for things like healthcare, but in transportation, it's extremely dependent. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is maximize the amount of work that we can do on Vermont roads. We in our northern climes take some punishment here with the pavement. And so getting everything that we can for folks and also helping people transition to a more affordable and cleaner future with lower emission and electric vehicles and public transit. Those have all been priorities for me on committee. But as Representative Toof was saying, when we stopped our sort of business as usual back in the spring and then transitioned toward response to COVID-19, the depth with which we were helping people navigate in real time new programs that were becoming available. There was a point at which I had 6 people who I was helping them track their cases through unemployment, the unemployment insurance and the pandemic unemployment assistance programs. And frankly, legislators had to get in the trenches. Usually we're setting policy. In this case, we were helping our constituents bit by bit fill out which forms to file and all of that. So serving people and seeing how our policies and the decisions that we were making and the governor was making were playing out in people's lives in real time, it made this job and the importance of doing it well just that much more clear. And I think the kind of experience and caring for working Vermonters that I bring to this position is something that I hope people will see and want to see me back there.
Yeah, just ask everybody, be as concise as you can. There's a lot of issues out there, a lot of ground to cover, and I know that's not the easiest thing at times. David, was there one issue prompting you to get in, or when you look at the legislature, what's been going on again in this strange session, any particular issue or issues jumping out at you that you wanted to kind of ideally maybe dive into if you get elected?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a variety of issues. I would never be a one-issue candidate. But I think about, particularly in light of COVID, the failure to pass paid family leave stands out to me as a place Vermont's social network and social safety net can be improved. And COVID has only highlighted how important that program would be for small employers who can't necessarily offer that without state assistance.
Mike, just on that issue, you're a supporter also of paid family leave?
Yeah, I've been a
And for
long-time
that matter,
supporter.
the higher minimum wage?
Yeah, so when I think about how we make it so that families have economic stability, so that they don't have to make the choice between paying the rent or buying food and taking care of a sick child or themselves, we have real inequities in Vermont. There's a huge income and inequality issue in Vermont. And part of how we can make it so that families can get through difficult times is by having an affordable way for businesses and individuals to have insurance so that when they do need to take some time off, they don't lose their income and have the bottom fall out from that. So I'm a big supporter of a paid family leave insurance program that's affordable for everybody, and the way that we do that is by having it be statewide.
Rep. Toof, I think, at least as it was proposed, and you see that issue differently. You were an opponent of the paid family leave proposal that came before the legislature?
Yeah, and I do agree that we do need a paid family leave program. In fact, the governor came up with a really good paid family leave program that was going to work with the state of New Hampshire. Him and Governor Sununu worked on that. And this feels like so long ago when we were debating this in the floor in January. But yeah, I agree that we need it. His plan would not have raised taxes. The plan that went through that the governor vetoed and it would have raised a payroll tax on Vermonters, and I didn't support that. I really like the idea of working on the governor's plan and seeing what we can get through there.
How did New Hampshire fare any better? The key was both states agreeing to this for it to go forward?
I believe in this, like I said, this was so long ago, but I believe it was working with the, creating a pool using our state employees and their state employees. We have around the same amount of state employees. And so that pool would have offset the premium. So it would have been an opt-in. So I could have opted in and paid voluntarily instead of it coming out of my payroll every week. So that's one thing I did support.
Bruce, on the, again, I realize you're not down there, but your thoughts on that was a big issue.
Well, my thoughts are this. I'm not against paid family leave, but we got to get people back to work. I mean, we've got to, I think, we got to stop raising taxes. And one of the ways, in my opinion, of doing that is making Vermont a more business-friendly state, bringing more people into the state, establishing more businesses, and growing the growth. Growth will take care of, hopefully take care of some of the income problems that we have. But paid family leave is a good thing, but the employers have to be able to afford to do it, to give it. And small business, we just haven't done enough for the small businesses in this state. In my opinion, I've said it before, in my opinion, in the state of Vermont, small business is big business. We haven't seen any large companies move into this state, like IBM, Intel, or anything like that. I mean, now we get excited if we get news that Target wants to build a store somewhere in the state of Vermont. So that tells me we got to take care of what we have. We got to take care of the small business people because they're the backbone right now.
Just for the record, two Republicans to my left here. I'll take a wild guess. You folks are both supporting Phil Scott, Republican governor's re-election bid, and also supporting Scott Milne for lieutenant governor.
Yes.
A wild guess, and I take a wild guess over here that might be a little different. Mikey supporting Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman's gubernatorial bid.
Yes, I am.
And Molly Gray for lieutenant governor.
Yes.
And David, yourself the same.
Absolutely.
You're good. Again, a lot of issues out there. I'm hearing, and again, as we talked about before, the budget passed, and again, I guess this was a budget for the final 9 months of fiscal year 2021. I'm hearing from legislators and other folks that boy, your work was relatively easy on this budget, but the budget for the next fiscal year, 2022, is going to be really difficult, which maybe kind of begs the question, are higher taxes at some point inevitable? Mike, you want to take a concise shot at that big question?
Yeah, so the bottom line is that right now, we do not know what the real fiscal impact will be. So we
The
put
key being just how much
Yeah,
the
so
feds jump into the
we put
battle.
$200 million in reserves and are projecting a little over $100 million gap between, the normal cost increases of what happens in the general fund and the revenues that will be available according to the most recent fiscal analysis. But as I said before in my interview with the St. Albans Messenger, on my committee, we were projecting over $40 million in a gap just in the last 3 months of the last fiscal year. And that ended up being less than half of the gap that was projected by the analysts because the economy was moving differently and with a lot of struggle and pain for a lot of Vermonters. But there was more economic activity and more revenue than had been projected by the sort of consensus forecast. So it's really important for us to say, there are going to need to be changes in the way we deliver programs. There's going to be support from the federal government. And then when we look at providing the services that Vermonters need and making sure that we support small businesses and families through the transition to recovery, that's going to take deep policy knowledge and experience to be able to do that and serve people well, and also a lot of caring and empathy for those small business owners and those families, so we're not cutting essential services. And I think right now, we're poised to be on track to not have to make revenue increases that are going to sort of hurt people when they can least afford it, need to raise taxes. I don't foresee that in the next fiscal year, but there's definitely going to be a lot of changes in programming and a lot of federal funding and reserve revenue that we're going to have to really think carefully about how we want to invest it.
Right. David, I realize you're not there, but the thought of raising taxes, if that's something you had to do down the line, or is that something, I guess, ideally you'd like to stay away from, or hard to say at this point?
I think it's really hard to say. I can't predict what the economic activity next month is going to look like, let alone FY21. What I do know is that taxes should be equitable. And if you have more income and more disposable income, you should be able to pay a little bit more, because we shouldn't be balancing the budget on the backs of working families. That's partly why I'm not a huge fan of the property tax. We use income sensitivity because we know property tax is a blunt tool that is not fair to working families a lot of the time. So I think making sure when we are having a conversation about taxes, we're having a conversation about what is fair and who can pay, and it's not working families, especially right now.
Bruce, thought on taxes? Something tells me you're not a big fan of higher taxes.
No, I'm not a big fan of it, but, never say never.
It might come to that, right?
Right, it might come to that, is correct. Never say never. That's a tough situation, especially now, because we don't have any crystal balls. We can't forecast the future. We don't know what's going to be going on. I do know that as far as budgets go, I'm kind of, I'm a little bit worried about the budget next year. If you take a look at what the schools are spending right now, just to keep the schools open, that was not in their school budgets last year. It's millions of dollars that they're spending to keep the schools open. Where's that money coming from? If that money doesn't come from the federal government, the state of Vermont is hurting. I don't care what you say. Money's got to come from somewhere because they're spending it. They've got it, and they didn't have it in their budgets. So where's that money going to come from? You're going to be looking at, my guesstimate would be is that a lot of the towns are going to be looking at tax increases because of the school budgets next year.
Casey, again, same thing for you. I mean, I'm sure higher taxes is the last thing you want, but is it possible it might come to that, or just really hard to talk future too much right now?
It is going to be hard to talk future because, that's why we extended our legislative session till October, or almost October.
Well, this must have been the latest session in
I believe this was the longest session in the history of the state of Vermont.
Really, maybe ever. Wow.
And when I look at, the budget that we passed this year, I've got to applaud the work of our appropriations committee, but Governor Scott for proposing a budget that did not raise taxes. We sat down and we said, I'm on the education committee, that's the committee I serve on, and we did talk, Bruce is talking about education taxes. We spend $2 billion a year in our ed fund. But there are expenses that are coming out that they did not anticipate. that we are fighting for, that we had to fight for to get money from the federal CARES money. That CARES money did not solve all of our issues, did not solve all the problems. And if we do get more, I believe we were the second highest per capita beneficiaries in the country. I forget who's number one, but we received a lot of money compared to other states that have a larger size. So, but we couldn't spend that to hold down revenue, and it really, we sat in I remember sitting down and they were like, well, property taxes could go up 26 cents if we don't do anything, and so we had to work around this, and that's the problem going forward is how we're going to solve these issues next year. And I have full faith if Governor Scott is reelected that he'll be able to figure out a good budget. But I have got to give all the props to our Appropriations Committee who worked around the clock. I know Mike can say that they were in his committee every day. They're in my committee every day figuring out how we're going to allocate money. It's not an easy job. It's not an easy job when you're talking. I think they had the governor asked for a 3% cut across his administration, and that trickled down to a lot of different programs and stuff. So it's not an easy year for anyone.
Yeah, the back to school issue sounds like it's been obviously a huge issue. I guess a lot of kids are going to school like a couple days a week.
Yep.
And I know you're supporting the governor. Do you think Education Secretary French has done a decent job? I'm still running into a lot of people who have a lot of questions and concerns on the education front. Do you think the state's done about as well as it could do, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the toughest jobs right now because I have a 5-year-old who's starting kindergarten this year. He's going Thursday and Friday. We've had to find childcare for Monday through Wednesday, but even still, Thursday and Friday before and after school. So it's been tough for like my family, and the kids want to learn. He wants to be in school. He loves Thursdays and Fridays when he goes to school. I think they're taking, so Secretary French, we have a very unique system in the state of Vermont where we have our local control, and I have full faith in our local school board and our Maple Run Unified District. I think they're doing a great job. They're trying, they have to worry about kids, they have to worry about teachers, staff, any kind of spread, bus routes, their sports are starting back up. It's not an easy job. I think they've taken every precaution. Dr. Fauci came on and said we're doing the best that he's seen in the entire country in the state of Vermont. And I think, I don't think it's just because of our small size. I think we've done things by wearing masks. We've been doing the right stuff. But when you have kids interacting in school, it's hard because they're not getting reimbursed for everything and the staff hours and stuff like that. So it's a really tough job, but I think he's done a good job.
Yeah. Bruce, with your day job, I know you have a pretty good feel for the Milton School District. How do you think? Have you been reasonably comfortable with what you've seen with just the back to school situation?
I think with what they've had to work with, I can speak for Milton and a couple of other districts that I work with. I think they've done a fantastic job.
Yeah.
Fantastic. It's totally different from anything they've ever experienced before. The changes are astronomical, but there's so many things that they had to take into consideration. Just not getting the kids into school every day, but how is it affecting the kids mentally? I just think that with what they were given to work with, they did a fantastic job.
Yeah. Mike, your thoughts on the education front? Again, like I said, I'm still running into parents. What a tough time, but I'm still running into folks with hoping it's going to go okay, but just still a lot of concerns and questions.
Yeah, so I think what's important for people to understand is that we were the recipients of $1.25 billion in coronavirus relief funds. Yeah. And when you look at our typical state spending, a couple $1 billion in the education fund, a couple $1 billion in the general fund, and you add that up, we're typically spending upwards of $6 billion as a state. So you add another $1 billion plus of federal money plus the stimulus checks that went out. Yeah. That does a lot to offset the economic activity that was lost from businesses being closed. I mean, my day job, I was put on 1 day a week for 8-10 weeks, and I know a lot of people who are out of work for a lot longer. That's gotten a lot better, and now I know a lot of companies are hiring. So the economic activity for now, as long as we continue to do those things Representative Toof talked about, we wear a mask, we socially distance, we follow the example of people who are the public health experts and what they're telling us to do, we're not going to run into the kind of revenue situation that I think even has been projected. I think we're going to be in much better shape as long as we don't see a second big spike in cases. And that's up to all of us. I mean, so, we as leaders, we're sitting here today and we're distant from each other enough, but we're inside a room and we're wearing masks to try to protect one another. If we can govern the way that we're behaving right now, I think we're not going to get into the kind of terrible, doom and gloom revenue situation as a state. But we all need to advocate to our federal delegation to make sure that they support municipalities and they support state government. And that is the one thing that on a policy level, I just think is unconscionable about the way that Congress in DC, and I know that our delegation has really been fighting to provide that support for state and local governments who are going to be in a tough shape if we do have a worse economy.
David Glidden, as an outside observer, any thoughts on the education front? How sure you're paying attention to that? How do you think that's worked out?
I mean, I have a unique perspective on this, as I was on an IEP as a kid. I'm dyslexic, was put in English as a second language class. Definitely not my second language, just didn't understand what was happening with written writing. And I wonder, as I talk to families with youth with special needs and some of the work I do with youth with special needs, how we're meeting their needs at this time. It's incredibly difficult to do a one-on-one through a computer. And I think that as we look at how we adapt schools to this strange pandemic time, I'm really hoping that youth who need extra support are getting it, and I'm not sure that's always the case. And I think that puts incredible burden on some of their families. And I think that's sort of an added expense that Mr. Cheeseman was talking about, but I think it's something that long-term is incredibly worth it. And I've heard from a couple families that right now it's not where it should be.
Right. I realize you folks are supporting the Democratic ticket here. Given that, Governor Phil Scott certainly has gotten pretty high marks for how he and his administration have handled the pandemic situation. I've made the comment before. I think Attorney General T.J. Donovan, en route to a big re-election, is luckiest politician in Vermont for not having announced for governor. But anyway, do you give the governor decent marks in the administration? Is there anything, as you're looking at what's going on, jumping out that you would have done much differently?
So I think they've done really well with COVID. I will give them that credit. I think it's the long-term vision for Vermont. He vetoed minimum wage, he vetoed paid family leave. Both of those were pre-pandemic, but would have helped working families through the pandemic. It's that long-term advocacy for working families that I find lacking. Yes, he listened to the doctors, and I'm so thankful for that, and that we've been able to contain COVID in the state, but the economic realities could have been better for working families, I truly
Mike,
believe.
what's your biggest critique of the administration?
Yeah, I would say on top of sort of the lack of vision in terms of what it actually will take to have equitable moving those working families to a better position. I mean, we talked about paid family leave earlier, and some of the comments that were made across the table had to do with, well, I want people to be able to opt into it. The problem is, if you just have an opt-in, it's so expensive, and that's why it didn't work in New Hampshire, and that's why we didn't see that come to fruition even in the bigger states, is because they couldn't make the numbers work where the premiums were affordable unless you included everybody. And so this thing of, I'd say overall my philosophy is that we need to come together. We need to work together in order to solve some of these big problems. And the biggest distinction between folks who are kind of on my side of the aisle and the governor, high marks for his COVID response. He's certainly been the antithesis of what the president's done and has been a great leader on the public health front. But the problem with the bigger looming crisis that our farms are facing, that tourism is facing, is the fact that our climate's changing. And that also means our economy and our energy use and the way that we heat and cool our homes needs to change. And Vermonters, a lot of them, especially seniors and working families, need support to do that, and we need good regulatory policy that acknowledges that. And while the governor said a lot of the right things, He acknowledged in a 2019 address to all of us in the legislature, we could save Vermonters $800 million a year of money that we're exporting to buy gasoline and diesel right now if we electrify our transit sector. But then he wasn't really willing to put investments in that would help to make that transformation happen. And so we did some small things and took some good steps this year on those fronts. But I think that the real visionary leadership we need to prepare Vermont for the next 20, 30, 40 years isn't there right now.
You were, I believe, a big supporter of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which of course the legislature, I guess, pretty easily overrode the governor's veto of that. David, you supported that as well, I
do.
assume?
Yep.
Let's flip over. Casey, you did not support that, am I correct?
I did not. No, I supported the governor's veto of the Global Warming Solutions Act.
There were some Republicans who
Yep.
did go forward.
Yeah.
It was party line, but some Republicans did defect, if that's a word.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I think that the Global Warming Solutions Act, I think, was written with the most, the best intentions. And I think that global warming is something we have to address. And I think it's something that it's going to be on the forefront of everyone's conversation in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, or where we're going. But the reason I voted against it, where there were two main reasons. The first main reason is it does open us up for people to sue the state. It holds a big liability over us. But the biggest one for me is it takes the power out of the legislative body and puts it into an unelected group of people. I believe there's like 21 or 23 people on this panel. And they're able to set standards or whatever they want without consequence. Like we have elections every year, and we have that consequence of, hey, we said we're going to ban gas-powered cars by 2035, like something similar that California's doing. They can make those decisions. That's why I voted against it and I didn't support it. Am I in support of working on global warming solutions? Yes, I'm on the youth caucus in the House. I work with many Democrats. We've talked about different types of things that we can get going. I just don't think that was the right thing for right now.
Bruce, had you been in the legislature, would you have voted, would you guess, against that also?
I would have voted against it,
Yeah.
and mainly because of the fact that it opens the state up for lawsuits. Very costly, very timely, working on stuff like that when we have other things that there's no doubt that global warming is an issue, a big issue, and, we'd have our heads stuck in the sand if we weren't, preparing to do something about it. But I think, going back to the governor, I think we're forgetting about what our economy was like before this pandemic came out. I think I don't think we enjoyed better times in the state of Vermont. Unemployment was low. People were selling homes like you wouldn't believe. The unemployment rate was I think the lowest that it's ever been.
I think so.
And I give the man a lot more credit for that. And he's somebody that I would like to work with and sit down with and plan the future for the state of Vermont.
Any criticism at all from anything you've seen from the administration? Is there any issue you weren't real happy with, any initiative?
Well, there's always things that you're not really excited about, but when you sit down and think about it and take it out of the heat of the moment, I kind of changed my mind a little bit, but nothing that would really, nothing that would steer me away from them.
Yeah.
I think
Casey,
he's
what
done
about
a
yourself?
fantastic job.
Anything with the administration that you were, upset with or thought was really off course?
Not so much in this my first term in there, and I want to respond to that, and I think he's done a good job. When we look at things like minimum wage, I love the idea of it. Problem with minimum wage is if you give somebody, say that someone's making $12 an hour, and you say, okay, they're going to make 15. The employer, that burden's going to go on the employer, and the employer could drop benefits or might not match a 401k or health insurance, and that's what we were really worried about. And I believe I already said about paid family leave, but paid family leave we have 90% of our minimum wage and paid family leave. 90% of our businesses in the state of Vermont are fewer than 25 people. So putting a burden on businesses, really putting a burden on our own citizens, because we don't have a huge workforce and big companies coming in here. So those types of things can really hurt businesses that want to come in here and provide jobs. That's just another obstacle that they have to jump over.
Could I just say something? I don't think that's an issue that we should really force onto small business, because what about the people that can't afford it? I mean, they know what they have coming in for money. If they can't afford to offer something like that, then at least they're being honest and saying it. I mean, and the governor knows, not every small business out there can afford to pay, for family leave. Not everyone.
Speaking of the reference to good intentions about another issue, Act 250 reform, where it seems like I'm hearing and reading about just a lot of disappointment. In fact, has the governor made a decision? I remember he was asked whether he would sign what sounded like a watered-down Act 250 reform plan.
Yeah, so
has he made a decision on that?
I don't know what the governor's going to do on the bill, but I have to say, to describe the bill that we passed as an Act 250 reform bill, I think is a mischaracterization. I think what we passed was a piece that was not terribly controversial about forest fragmentation and the dividing up of big forest blocks into smaller lots. The things I was excited about as, somebody who's worked on economic development in the downtown was about getting rid of duplicative permitting and allowing people to move forward with projects if there were, municipal regulations in place that were similar to state regulations.
And that's just not in there at all?
I think that there's a path to get there next year. And I think that the makeup of the committee that we had in the House was such that it pit people who took a pretty extreme stance on being quote unquote pro-development or pro-business and just wanted to get rid of all regulations, and some people that were really focused on building standards and things that would make buildings potentially make development more restrictive. So they just were loggerheads all the time, and then there was disagreement between the House and the Senate. So
Mike, did you vote for that?
I supported the forest fragmentation restrictions because I think it's really important to preserve habitat, and I think when we listen to, the administration was in support of most of the elements of those bills, and, I'm not an expert on forest fragmentation, but I just think that was the only piece of the Act 250, the big puzzle that we addressed. The piece that I know the most about and am most excited about seeing happen is giving developers more options to achieve the criteria that we want them to achieve with smart development. And a really geeky example is when we allow a developer to, instead of offering a certain number of parking spaces, to put transportation demand management into their Act 250 application so that they can offer bus passes where that's available. They can buy a carpooling van and eliminate the need for a bunch of parking spaces. They can use more innovative ways to get people to and from work that also help us with our climate goals. And when we think about development and allowing people more flexibility to meet the needs that our whole community has and be better stewards as we develop our land, that's where the Act 250 reform is really going to be key. It's got to be a partnership between people who want to develop and people who want to protect our current land development and use. But we've shown in St. Albans how you can do infill with public-private partnership. We know how to use the financing techniques and to get through the environmental protections that we need to preserve the health and well-being of our environment and the people who live and work in our communities. We know how to do that. The legislative process really failed on Act 250, and I want to go back because I'm somebody who, at least on a few of the criteria areas, can help push people within my party that I assume will still be in the majority to do the things we need to do to develop Vermont smartly for the next 50, 100 years.
David, Act 250 has been on the books for, 50 years. Any thoughts as an outside observer about how the legislature tried to make changes?
Absolutely. I think, understandably, the pandemic took a lot of oxygen out of the room. And it's one of the things I'm genuinely hopeful and excited about the idea of being in the legislature next cycle. Is I know how important developing our downtowns and developing affordable housing stock. Mr. Cheeseman talked about wanting to see young people be attracted to move to the state as a young person and a renter. Housing is a huge burden. I was on the planning commission back in Underhill where I grew up, and the way municipal zoning happens is often exclusatory, and it often doesn't enable us to build the housing stock we need to have a young and vibrant workforce. And I think, as Mike said, reducing duplicative permitting, and really enabling the infill to happen as St. Albans has demonstrated. St. Albans City is looking more vibrant. I serve on the downtown board. There's energy and excitement there, and I think we can use that model throughout the state and really build housing stock and a workforce that isn't there.
Casey, how'd you come down on Act 250?
I'm trying to remember the bill. What was the number of that?
926, I think.
926. I don't remember how I voted on that. I'll have to look that up.
There's a lot of criticism it was watered down as kind of Mike got into. But
It wasn't as big as a bill as I think people are making it out to be. And I got to agree with Rep. McCarthy. Act 250 changes need to happen. I think that's where we combat the climate change in the future when we're looking at how development in the future. Affordable
there's been
housing.
talk for years. Every election, I'm always hearing about making permitting easier, that the state is still too, anti-business, and
Yeah.
some people think, but it seems like that issue just never gets dealt with too well.
It's a tough one to find people that across the whole state that would support any kind of change that would be as dramatic as what people campaign on.
Yeah.
And that's one of the issues. It was set up for a reason 50 years ago, and it's really hard to pull that back. But affordable housing is a very big issue right now, especially with COVID. When COVID happened, I'm hearing that housing prices are skyrocketing. People are coming in from out of state. They're looking for houses. They see Vermont's a safer space. What that does to our housing market is it drives it up. And we have, I've rented for like 15 years after college, and it was just, it's so expensive to find a place. You're like, why don't I just pay for a mortgage when I could pay the same amount in rent? And we sat down, I believe it was last year, may have been this year, we sat down with an affordable housing committee in St. Albans at City Hall, and there was a whole room full of people telling you why it's impossible to make housing affordable in this state. And it's a big issue we have to fit. If we want younger people to come in, we have the oldest population in the country. If we want younger people to come in, we have to make houses affordable. I look at like a typical house in St. Albans, $275. I remember like 5 years ago it was like $230. The housing market's just gone way up in that time.
Bruce, you might have had some dealings with Act 250 issues on the select board. But
I think that
are there needed changes that just don't seem to get done?
I think the biggest thing is we've got to streamline permit processing to get things done. And we actually have to educate the builders on what we're expecting in our towns. Take the arguments right out of it and lay it on the table. I've worked for one of the largest construction companies in the United States. I traveled all over the United States building buildings for IBM, Intel, all the big people. And the toughest place for us to build a building was here in the state of Vermont, as far as permit processing, getting water, getting sewer, getting a site shovel ready for a building. I'll give you a perfect example of that. 20 years Walmart spent trying to get into this town, where Target has made a comment that they would never chase a location for 20 years. Never. There's a prime example of what I'm talking about. And affordable housing, gosh almighty. That's one thing we talk about on the Downtown Development Board in Montpelier is, we really like to give out grant money. We like to see people investing in the older pieces of property. You got some wonderful neighborhoods out there that have a lot of history to them and mean a lot to these towns that people are they're vacating because of the new construction that's going up. So you've got a lot of houses that are left behind that are somewhat abandoned. And I'd love to see it when contractors go in and renovate places like that and try to bring those neighborhoods back to life.
Down to about 15 minutes. I mentioned this, I think, off air. I'll let you each ask, if you want to, you don't have to. I'll let each of you ask one of your opponents, whatever, somebody else a question. David, I'll start with you. Anything you want to throw at anybody here?
Yeah, I have a question for Representative Toof. In the messenger, you talked about ag and sort of gave a one-line answer of it's a lot of federal policy. And I'm curious, as I come from a farming community, I really value farms. If you want another sort of stab at what you would do for ag, or how do you think that ag is just a federal issue here?
Yeah. So in the interview, I gave a longer answer. I think that's what she printed. My grandfather and grandmother were farmers in Fairfield for over 60 years, and Agriculture is a huge factor to our economy in the state of Vermont. I believe it's over a $2 billion industry. When I said the pricing and stuff is out of our control, these prices were competing with like Colorado and international milk prices. Sometimes, from my understanding, and I don't claim to be an expert on milk prices or anything like that, but from my understanding is when we get a price for milk, it could be 2 weeks after the milk price was set, or there's some lag time there. So you look at a business like Dairy Farmers of America, which was the co-op for 100 years. They have 192 employees, maybe more now, since they're expanding and they brought more money in. These are huge jobs to our economy. And when you look at people, when they want to come to the state, tourism is our number one industry. What do they like to see? They like to see our farmland spread out. They go, they drive, look at the leaves, they look at our farms and everything. So this is a huge issue that would really, I believe COVID, I think we saw more farms close under COVID. We're seeing more than what's been happening. I mean, we've seen hundreds of farms in the last 10 years go under, which is very unfortunate to see. And the thing of a family farm is no longer a thing, and it's really sad because, like I said, I spent my entire summers at my grandparents' farm. We go up for Sunday every Sunday for dinner up there, and you just don't have that luxury anymore. Luckily, our maple industry is growing, and but yeah, when I was talking about the pricing, it's so out of our control, and we need a lot of help from our federal delegation and that.
Casey, have you got a question for someone? Anything you want to throw at any? You don't have to.
Yeah, you can come back to me on that. I don't really have one right now.
Brute question for
Yeah,
anybody?
I guess I've got one for Mr. McCarthy. Is you talked about the state of Vermont being so dependent on federal funds. Why is that?
Yeah, so a big piece of it is that we're a small state, and we have done a great job, actually, of making sure that we get as much of the revenue that we can from the federal government so that we keep pressure off of property taxes and sales and gas taxes as much as possible, but still be able to provide the services that folks need in Vermont. A lot of small states that are rural share our dependence on federal funding for highway, for instance. So I'll give you a perfect example is that a lot of people will ask me, as a member of the Transportation Committee, why don't we have tolls in Vermont? And the reason we don't have tolls in Vermont is that if you put in a toll and want to get that revenue of every car passing on the interstate, you have to give up your federal highway allocation formula funds from the federal transportation fund. And the problem with that for Vermont is the volume doesn't make the math work out, whereas it does in New Hampshire where there's more traffic volume. And so in so many ways, because we have so much more pavement and infrastructure per capita, we're really dependent on the federal government, and we need to make the best use of those dollars that we can. And I think in a very tripartisan way in the 4 years I've been on the House Transportation Committee, we do a good job of working with the administration, whether it's I've been there under a Democratic governor and now under a Republican governor, of making sure that those dollars get divvied up and that we provide as much support for the towns as we can.
My question for
Thank you.
anybody?
I wanted to ask Bruce, he served on the town select board and I've been on the city council, and we've been trying to, this district is mostly the city and then about a third of the town. So it straddles, and I've been somebody who's really wanted to work with people like Select Board Chair Brenda Deso to see where there are places where the city and the town can partner for the benefit of the whole community. Because more and more, I think people my age see St. Albans as one community. When I attended a meeting before COVID, back in the old days, about the pool where city councilors were invited, you left that meeting in protest over the meeting even existing, when there were constituents in the room who were there to hear the issues that were going to be discussed. And I'm wondering, as a legislator who's got to serve on committees and compromise and sit down at the table with people who don't agree with you, and sometimes the agenda's out of your control, how are you going to tell our neighbors and constituents that you're going to listen and be ready to roll up your sleeves and do that work together?
But thanks for bringing that up, Mike.
As concise, we're down to 10 minutes, as concise as you can be, please.
Concise as I can be. The only reason I walked out of that meeting is because that meeting, in my opinion, was set up. We knew nothing about that meeting. We got no notice of that meeting. Our our chair at the time, set that meeting up in a private meeting with the city. Didn't call the rest of the board to let the rest of the board know and to let them know that that was going to happen and prepare for that meeting. And I was not a proponent of the pool. And you can thank God that the pool's not there right now, because the town would have been the only person that had money into it. And I just think that it wasn't orchestrated well enough, and there weren't people weren't educated well enough on it. When I walked out of that meeting, I told Mr. Dusso that if this failed, it was going to be because of him. And it failed. It failed because people did not understand. Not everybody had the big picture and understood it.
Albeit for the record by a pretty close vote in the town. City, of course,
It was a
approved it
pretty
easily.
close vote, but when you take 64 to 65 people in the town that didn't vote for it,
No, I'm just saying it was a pretty close vote in the town.
it was a
City
close
passed
vote,
it
yeah.
easily.
It was a close vote, but you know what?
But it
Not
went
close
down, you're
enough.
right, it went down. Anyway, Casey, anything come to mind or not? Should we move on to?
No, go ahead.
How about Lake Champlain? How huge do you think the Messenger has a front page story today? Why is the lake so low? Well, probably lack of rain might be one answer, but anyway, very low lake. But Lake Champlain water quality issues, Mike, we're down to just 9 minutes. Is the state on track? Are you comfortable? Funding has been a concern all the time. Do you think we're on track to finally improving water quality at places like St. Albans Bay, Missisquoi Bay?
Yeah, last year in 2019, we set in place a funding mechanism to actually meet our federally mandated water quality goals. But when I think about the interrelationship between our water quality goals and the changing climate, I mean, you want to know that whether or not climate change is real, ask a farmer, right? Ask somebody who lives along the lake. And the consequences of that change, we are doing way too little too late. So I think on the specific water quality, we worked together in a bipartisan way to come up with a funding mechanism last year, and I'm really proud of that. It will still, best case scenario, be 20, 25, 30 years before we really get rid of the phosphorus that's in the lake now and get to a place where we've got the clean water we all want. So we've taken some good steps in the right direction, but I think all of that benefit could be eliminated if we continue to see drought and then heavy rain because of climate change over the next few decades. That will completely wipe out any effort and any investment we make, because that'll just load the lake up more with heavy rainfall followed by drought.
David, is that a question any of your would-be constituents? You hear that? Is there?
Absolutely. I hear not just about the bay, but about Carmi. People have memories of Carmi
I
from
should
their
have noted,
youth,
sure,
and
Lake Carmi's become almost a poster
Exactly.
child.
It's very different. I think I'm hopeful that we can continue to foster some really great public-private partnerships when it comes to water quality. I know farmers are doing an incredible job, and I think we should continue to resource them through things like the UVM extension. I know Treasurer Pierce has done some incredible work that I've looked at on water quality, and I think the legislature took some steps in the right direction this
Casey, is, again, we're talking limited resources all the time. Are you comfortable with what the state's trying to do about water quality issues?
I
mean,
am.
It's been a struggle.
Yeah, it's been a struggle, but we signed a bill. It was a huge tripartisan effort. We all met down at the Bay last year for the ceremonial signing, and it was refreshing to see everyone there and fighting for a good cause. And I think that's what people forget, and I alluded to this earlier, tourism, #1 industry in the state of Vermont. All those houses on the lake that they rent out, or people come in for recreational sports. Climate change is something we have to address, or we're going to see those problems that continually happen in our bay and in Lake Champlain and in Lake Carmi. And I think we're doing the right steps. I think the farmers are doing. We're seeing a better success than we ever have. I think it's the steps the state's taken. It's not going to happen overnight, and it is a big issue. I do have a lot of people reach out to me. A lot of people have second homes down there. A lot of people that I know in St. Albans live down there, and it's a big thing, and it's something that we need to keep an eye on.
Bruce, certainly an issue you dealt with a lot as when you were on the select board.
Yeah, I think it's come quite a ways, actually. It's no longer just an issue during June and July and August, when you start to get the smell and everything. I think now that it's on people's mind constantly year-round. The town has done a bit to help clean the bay up with the rakes that they bought and everything, and I think the state is... everybody's finally realizing it's something we got to deal with. It's not going to go away, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah. Just one more question, then I'll let you each give you about a minute or so to make your case. But just very quickly on this one, marijuana taxing and regulating marijuana. Good move, bad move? There are those who don't see it as a moneymaker for Vermont. Others think it's stupid just to have the current law. Very quickly, should we be moving more on that or what?
Well, when I said never say never about taxes,
Yeah.
I think that's a way that we could draw some income into the state
So
of
you think
Vermont
there could be
by
some income
legalizing
coming out of
marijuana.
Yeah.
I don't see it, that's my opinion on it.
Okay, Casey, very quickly, is that
Yeah, I supported the bill when it was just passed last week, or
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, or wherever we're at now, and it hit on the 3 spots that Governor Scott had a problem with all 3, and I was worried it was going to get vetoed, and it met all of his demands pretty much. So I voted in support of it, 20% tax. I had a bill that I proposed at the beginning of the session this year, which would have gone to an after-school program using the sale of cannabis money. So I'm hoping that, and that's one of the things that we ended up working with. They didn't actually use my bill; it was kind of went into another one. But that's kind of, if we can find any money, I don't think it's a cash cow as everyone thinks it's going to be. But I think that if we can find that revenue there and use it for good things like helping childcare after school, keeping kids occupied. So.
Mike, you supported that bill?
Yep, I was a co-sponsor, its companion in the House, and the status quo has been kind of ridiculous because we already have legalized possession, but there's no legal
Don't try
place
to buy it from
right?
somebody.
So, but because we're setting up a huge market and a licensure and a cannabis control board, it's going to be 2 years before we see any net revenue. So I think we need to be really careful about setting expectations for Vermonters that funding the after-school programs and the other good things that it will do in future fiscal years is going to take a couple years of investment.
Yeah, David, is this good initiatives?
I think getting it off the black market makes sense, and I think the revenue part makes sense, and I was really glad to see the legislator make moves on expungement as well.
Right. Gentlemen, we're down to about a little under 4 minutes. I'll give you each, please, 45 seconds or so. David, I'll start with you. Make your case. Why are you a good choice to be sent to Montpelier?
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, just getting through school took advocacy for myself and my parents. I took interventionists at a lot of levels. I know what it's like to not get what you need and to really have to advocate for it, and I want to be an advocate for the community here in St. Albans and to make sure Montpelier is working for us and for our community.
Mike?
I'm really been honored to be elected to this position twice, and am looking forward to a third term if I'm able to do that again. I think I'm going to bring experience and a voice that can balance the economic development needs that we have here, that we've been successful dealing with in the city council and in my work as a small business owner, serving on the downtown board and other boards in our community, with the real challenges that we have in terms of supporting working families and protecting our environment. And so if you want somebody who's going to listen, work across the aisle, and get things done in committee, please elect me, Mike McCarthy, again to state representative.
Bruce, taking a shot at Montpelier. Why would you be a
taking
good
a shot.
choice of voters?
Well, because I'd like the opportunity to go to Montpelier to try to get things done. I mean, we've talked about things here at the table today that we've been working on for years, and nothing's happened. I'm a type of person, I've always worked on scheduling and deadlines, and I've always worked on budgets. I've worked on some multi-million-dollar budgets. I have a lot of experience there, and I have a lot of experience in getting things done. Basically, mine is just kind of down to earth. I just want to see great things happen for the state of Vermont, and I will go to Montpelier representing the people that put me there. Okay, the people in Montpelier are people that you work with. You try to convince them to follow your lead and help you get some bills passed, but don't forget the people that really put you in office. It's back here in the town of St. Albans. In the
Casey,
city.
why are you a good choice for a second term?
Yeah, St. Albans is a community that I grew up in. I was born here, raised here. I learned to swim at the city pool. I learned to play baseball at the Little League field. I went to BFA. Right now, serving is one of the greatest things that I've ever done, and it's truly the biggest honor that I've ever had, second only to being a father. And when I look at the future of St. Albans and the future of the state of Vermont, it's something that is really weighs on me. I have 2 boys. They're 5 and 4 years old. One's in school. One will be in school in a couple of years. And that's why I'm running, because I care about them. I care about my neighbors. What's right for St. Albans isn't always what's right for the rest of the state, but I'll be an advocate for the people of St. Albans like I have been.
Very good. Hey, on that note, we're going to call it a day. Again, these are the candidates running in the Franklin 3-1 House District. Again, a 2-member district. covering all of St. Albans City, part of St. Albans Town. I should note that the rest of the town, the majority of the town's represented by Lynn Dickinson, the St. Albans Town Republican who has no opposition in her re-election bid. So again, folks, some people may have already voted, but you can vote from basically now to Election Day, November 3rd. Again, 2-member district and 4 candidates. Representative Mike McCarthy, a St. Albans City Democrat. David Glidden, a St. Albans City Democrat. Bruce Cheeseman, a St. Albans Town Republican. And Representative Republican Rep. Casey Toof of St. Albans Town. Thanks for the time, folks. Good luck to all of you, and thanks to my man Roger out there, the key guy on this show. And again, another show coming up in about a half hour. Thanks for watching us on Northwest Access.